Tar Heel history. I'm working on a tar pitch turpentine barrel. They were made out of pine. And today we're doing a little work in the Cooper shop. We're going out with, we'll start hacking some trees, chipping the trees. But right now I'm cutting a crows, which is where the head will fit in the barrel. Okay, that's called a crows, and the groove it cuts is called a crows. If you can see this groove in here, that's where the head will fit into it. And basically your inside, you can see the inside of the barrel coming together. Well, it's made out of pine, like they made them out of pine. They used the cheapest wood possible. Whatever was coming out of the woods, it was dried out, and they made them. What's a 32-gallon barrel has 31.5-inch staves. It has a 19.5-inch head in it, and it holds 32 gallons, which weighed about 320 pounds with the barrel at the scales in Wilmington. So they had some that were 280 in the beginning, but later on they synchronized the whole state and they went to a 32-gallon barrel, 320 pounds, and that was with the product in it. And if it didn't, they would add rocks, water, whatever they needed to get the weight up on the barrel. And they didn't like that. The other thing, the barrels they made were very cheap, quick made barrels, and they leaked, and they would make tar and pitch in the wintertime, put it in these barrels, ship it. In the spring, it would sit on those docks in Wilmington. The weather was cool. Then after they sold it, they would go home, the temperatures would heat up in the 90-degree marks as it is now in May, June, before they could ship all this stuff to England or up north. That tar and pitch would melt. It melts at about 120, 130 degrees, and so it would become liquefied, and they were such poor craftsmen on the barrels that when it would heat up and the barrels would heat up, it would leak all over the docks, which forced the British into passing laws that back then when they had wooden hoops, they would have them put 12 hoops on each barrel, and you had to have a 4-inch stave. And these pine barrels were so apt to leak into ships taking it back to England that the British started making them brand everything they did. And so your Coopers would have to put a brand on it. And that brand was registered at the docks in with England. And so next year, if your products leaked out of your barrels on the docks or on the way back to England, which by the way, it leaked a lot on the docks, ran through the docks, and down in Wilmington, they say today, there's still tar and pitch under the water, down below the waterline that leaked out of there 200 years ago. But you would have to brand your products, and they kept that brand, recorded, and they would charge you back for the products lost the next year. So your Coopers, they made buckets, barrels, you name it, out of wood, out of pine, yellow pine in this area. And these buckets would be used for dipping the resin out of the trees and also carrying water and turpentine, and I'm sure tar and pitch also. Now, here in my Cooper shop where we build the barrels, we got an anvil, of course, to work on our rings, our hoops. But I've got it mounted to something very interesting, which is a stump that was under an old house from 1798 that we're actually remodeling here in the county at our history museum. And we had to replace the piers under it, And this one, when we rolled it out, I couldn't believe my eyes that it had been a turpentine tree and filled this thing with resin. That's why they used it under the house as a support, because the termites haven't eaten it, because they won't touch it because it's full of this resin. But you can see that before this thing was cut off and used as a house pier, it was actually a turpentine tree. And you can see where they cut it with the hacks every week and cut the V. I thought that was very interesting. And last week we started a new streaking on a pine tree. They called it streaking, they called it chipping. This was called a hack. This is the tool that does the work when you're down below waist chest high. You can see we got resin last week out of the first chipping. So the first thing you do, now here we use the Hurdy system with the pot and the tin, because of course we don't want to box every tree we've got, because they had problems out of that. Even though these were never used in North Carolina, only the box system was. But for today, with the trees we work, we used Hurdy's pot and tin system, our own little method, our own little way. It's a little galvanized tin cup, okay? And then we just put a piece of tin up here to catch the resin and run it down. But the way, this is an actual hack from the time period, and the way you work this face is you start your first streak over your box that we covered in the last episode, and then you start April 10th. It's now June, so just remember, when you're pouring sweat and it's running out of you, that's when these trees are pouring resin at the same time. Just when you're pouring water, these things are pouring resin, okay? Oleo resin. So we're gonna move our pot so we don't fill it full of bark. Come right above your streak the second week. And cut your second streak. And you cut your V. Now, remember I told you, this first streak has started turning to fat lightwood. You're not going to get any more there, okay? So your second week, you have to come above your first streak. Do your hack. Place your pot. Now you can see the resin's already started. Just as soon as we come down it with a hack, you see it looks like water beading out of the tree. And that's where we severed the ducts that come from the heart. And this oleo resin will run down in this V-shaped cut we made with the hack, and it'll run right down into that little tray that's going to run it right out into that little pot. You do this once a week, every week, and they average doing it to 10,500 trees a week. Okay. All right, you can see 40 minutes later, the resin is already running down this one that we started out with and dripping into the bucket. if you'll notice, it looks like water. It runs out like water, but it sets up like Italian ice in the pot, or in the pan, or in the box. And as you can see, this face is getting really wet with that oleo resin running out. Now this, when you cook it in a whiskey still, turns into turpentine. Now this is a puller. As I told you, we started out with a hack low down below your knees, and that weight on it helps you pull it through the bark to start with. But as you get on up the tree, you use the puller, which is a double-sided tool. And you can see I worked this tree last week. It's got a little bit of resin in here now that's run out of the tree. But if you see, we're up high on this one because we've worked this tree 4 or 5 years. Each week the streaks. And so when you get up high like this, you see where it's run down the tree last week. We're going to take the puller, and the puller you can keep adding stick to so you can keep going up. But basically you take it and just work it. Another streak. Then you can turn the puller and work your other side. Now you remember I talked about scrape in the winter time. In the fall and winter, the resin that's had to run so far down this tree will set up and air gets to it, and it turns to gum and it turns hard. And that would only make 1/2 the turpentine of the wet virgin dip. But still, they wanted to add that to their barrels, to the wet virgin dip, because it gave them another half. And they would use a tool like this, called a Hogal, H-O-G-A-L, in the fall and winter, and come in here and take off that scrape and gum. You see that? And add that to their mixture of virgin dip in the fall. Now we showed you the scrape, and here it is in the resin that ran from last week. As you can see in there, it runs out like water, but it sets up almost like Italian ice that you buy in the store and eat. That's what it looks like. But you want to move your bucket to keep the bark out. And like I say, each week, once you got this high, you took a puller and cut it again. Cut some new resin ducts, because this has already turned to fat lightwood, and you cut it all you want to, but it's solid. It's not going to run anymore. So each week you had to go up, cut you a new streak. Now you can see after just a few minutes, the oleo resin ducts are producing the resin that's coming out of the streaks we just cut. And as we pan down the tree, you can see how it turns it to lightwood, fat lightered, which is what we cooked in the beginning, the tree hearts, and made tar, because this resin will run out of this wood. This is what they did in Sweden to make tar. They stripped these trees, the resin soaked the wood, they cut down the trees, cut them up, put them in mounds, and cooked the tar out of the wood. Now look what I just stepped in out here demonstrating this stuff for y'all. And now that's resin that's dried, but the tar did the same thing on their heels. That's why they got the nickname Tar Heel.